Well, I'm not sure whether I need to do an introduction since Hank has already shaken everybody's hand and probably memorized your names too. But in any event, today's guest at USAT-U is Hank Wallace, and he's a Columbia Law School graduate and a former reporter at the Red Bank Daily Register, which was almost as good as the Bridgewater Courier News.
Both NJ.
Great newspapers in New Jersey, and I was at the Bridgewater Courier News. And probably scooping you all the time.
So the zoning board breaking news.
Zoning boards, man, yeah, they were good. So Hank does a seminar called Write and Speak Like the News, and it draws rave reviews from business groups, government agencies. He writes the FCC's plain language newsletter, and as I said in my announcement about this program, given the competitive digital news environment we're in, clear, concise, compelling writing has never been more important. And I meant that, very seriously. There are voices online who have maintained at times that the way to be successful, for a news organization to be successful online, is to aggregate news, to basically be a portal like Yahoo or AOL, and that we can use technology to do that. My view has always been that it's really the content that matters, and that's the thing that's going to differentiate us and make our audience want to come back to us. And I noticed there's an article in the recent edition of the American Journalism Review that talks about, it's entitled Embracing Online Content, and it says, as fewer and fewer people use portals to access the internet, AOL and Yahoo are hiring journalists and posting their own material in an effort to bolster web traffic. And I'll just read a little bit of the article. It says, AOL and Yahoo are plunging into the original news business for one very good reason. Their core business is declining. They say the key to turning things around is to expand their menu of original news content. Previously, the sites largely aggregated content from wire services and other news outlets. So what that tells me is they want to be more like us, and we're lucky to be us. One of the important things about content is the writing, and so it's a pleasure to have Hank here to give us some tips on how to do that. Hank, take it away.
Lead with the future, USAT friends, including Sam, and including Owen Ullman, too. Lead with the future, like your cover story today. Smart headline, new push to fight kids' hunger starts at school. The future significance of what you'll see is a background lead. So wherever possible, and you can follow along on page 2 of your booklets, wherever possible, I recommend lead with the future. If you can eke a future out to show people what will or may happen, and if you're writing a column or an editorial, what should happen, it's a great way to earn people's attention. USA Today was especially effective. We can go back and look back 9 years plus 2 days ago to your 9/12 edition with the headline, Act of War, showing people the significance of the past by projecting into the future of the significance. And that follows in a journalism line that precedes the 1982 introduction of this amazing new newspaper, USAT. What was the cover of Time magazine for the first edition after the President Kennedy assassination? Newsweek had Kennedy on the cover, but Time magazine sends a different message to its readers with its cover immediately after the Kennedy assassination. Do you know what the cover is? Johnson. Yeah, with this cover, Time magazine sends the message that, understandable sentiment aside, come to us for what you need to know about what will happen. It's a highly responsible thing to do, especially in a crisis, but it works across the boards, to lead with whatever is coming next or what may come next. So it's giving a heads up about certainties and even probabilities or even sometimes possibilities. That leading with the future, especially in a crisis, is leadership. We'll have examples from across the decades like that and across today here at USA Today. Let's look at a different type of lead sentence. At 8:28 a.m., the cafeteria ladies of Centennial High School take up positions in the second-floor hallway just outside closed classroom doors. Interesting, nostalgic for some people, but what about for busy people? Well, that meandering lead, which has its literary values, but on the other hand, it doesn't tell people instantly what's happening, is rescued by a lead with the future headline. Today's USAT, new push to fight kids' hunger starts at school. Let's look at another USAT meandering lead, evocative as all get out. Alaska Airlines conducted an extraordinary experiment about noxious mists. Intriguing, but for a busy person, well, it is saved once again by a smart USAT headline. Verdict expected soon on toxic air aboard jets. So I look forward to going over with you various USAT articles, and you set a high bar. We are going to both find examples to emulate and to improve. As far as the examples to improve, that took some work. The writing is so good that I've had to scour through USAT articles, and even where I do find something that I judge worthy of improvement, and I'll look forward to your comments on it too, even within the article, usually I've had to scour, because usually the writing is so good that it's just that I'll find one thing that I figure is worth improving. Now, and I'll give you another example, this from the New York Times, about this idea of how leading with the future rescues what could be an impatience-creating, meandering lead, even if it's a really interesting lead. And this, here next is this was the lead story from the New York Times recently. Afghan officials were showing President Hamid Karzai the evidence of the spectacular rocket attack on a peace conference earlier this month, which Karzai told them he believed the Taliban were not responsible for. Now, that's certainly a provocative lead, although people could, reading just that, would be wondering, but how do I place this into context? Smartly, the Times leads with the future here with the headline, former officials say Afghan leader seeks deal with militants. Then the drama is shown for busy audiences, how it fits in to what they need to know. Even though USAT started out as turning journalism upside down by being conversational in a newspaper, but now your conversationalness confronts busy people who have short attention spans, and if you are tweeting, you are, of course, constrained to 140 characters. But even if you're writing for the web, that's the other extreme, where there is no web assignment editor who tells you, keep it to 400 words. So sky's the limit in terms of the technological limitations, but the sociological limitations, all your competitors on the web likewise can write as often, and there are as many of them as they like, and therefore the benefit continues of this journalism ethic and ethos of giving people what they need to know fast, which commonly means lead with the future, if you can at all, with journalistic integrity. If there indeed is the future aspect that will make your story compelling, then by all means lead with it, at least in the headline, and usually in the lead sentence too. You are a media company, but in many ways you are an immediate company, in that your job is to be immediate, to give people immediately what they need to know, and only later in the story, if at all, filling in the background for people whose interest you have earned by leading compellingly, which commonly means leading with the future. Start at the point, don't just get to the point. In many ways, be USA tomorrow. Lead with the future. Do you have questions? Let's move on then. Feel free during our conversation to indeed make this a conversation. Do speak up with questions. Page 3. Well, even though I'm pumping lead with the future, grammatically and stylistically, I see tremendous value in present tense. It's a happy quirk of the English language that present tense is a great way to convey the future, and other times we will see through this part of the discussion, with a crispness and a brevity that the present tense has. There's a wonderful formula. Present tense plus a future time usually equals future sense. The New York Times reports that the new hours, he said, were the first step. We'll make it the new hours, he says, are. Now let's build up the various time elements. Here we're going from past to present. It would be intuitive that, in fact, it is intuitive. It's intuitive that present tense is more compelling, is stronger than past tense. So this we would expect on reflection. It would make sense to make this the new hours, he says, are the first step. The counterintuitive idea is that even though, again, I love leading with the future and having the future throughout wherever possible, that the future content is usually more compelling than present. But in terms of grammar, the present tense is crisper than the future tense, any of the various future tenses. And here, let's improve the time. Speaking of time, the New York Times, this reservation system that will go into effect in January. So instead, make it the reservation system that goes into effect, yes, in January. And you see how you need that time element. If we just said the reservation system that goes into effect, it would be hanging in midair. We usually need that future time element to have the present tense convey the future. And then finally, one more improvement of the intuitive, but the Times should have gotten it then, as USA Today usually has it, of present tense about attribution, and that museum officials say instead of said will allow them to spread our visitors during the day. Speaking of time again, during the day. So indeed, think of it as a convergence. Converge onto the present tense whenever you can. A new law which goes into effect, so there the Times gets it right by my standards, that a new law which goes into effect in January requires, instead of the new law which will go into effect in January, will require American citizens to carry passports. And then the convergence from the past, where they have that attribution later in the story, they smartly say, says Edmund instead of said Edmund. Emulate the Washington Post. Today, Microsoft Chairman Bill Gates comes to Washington instead of is going to be coming to Washington. Present tense conveys the future when you tie it to a future time usually. And you'll be amazed. Yes? The questioner is saying, and Sam, you've asked me to repeat the questions, huh? Okay. Are we across the boards at USAT saying variously said and says? It would be interesting if you ever say will say, well, on an advanced story. Yeah, it would be a great idea to... Does anybody have some black letter law that you could come up with a standard right now? Eddie? So when it's timed, so when the said is tied to a time, that tends to lock us in. It would be hard to say, Obama says yesterday. Mm-hmm. 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 One standard thank you. And one standard the comment is that for a hard news story, there's a certain definitiveness, I'll add to your comment, of nailing it down that it was said. Another element you can use is says conveys the sense that we here at USAT, and I like appropriating the we, that USAT is conveying the sense that we here figure that this will always be the stand of the person we're quoting. So so it would make sense to say, Obama says education is important. You know, it's unlikely that he's going to change his position on that. On the other hand, we would say, Senator Smith said they're backing Congressperson so-and-so for re-election, if we want to convey the idea that we're not sure that this will always be Senator Smith's position, then said makes more sense. You may have other standards also for when to say said or says. Anybody else? Well, that's a good start. Thank you. It is just extraordinary to me the types of future times that will fit perfectly into that formula of present tense plus future time equals future sense. It can be the leaves turn red soon. Just plain soon is a future time. It works. Or a new amendment goes into effect with the inauguration of the governor. Or even commonly, if you're quoting from a referendum, it'll be a new amendment goes into effect with the inauguration of the next governor. That would be even more common. Page 4. Present tense often combines present and future. I should actually emphasize present and future. 30 states have banned texting while driving, but the laws are difficult to enforce. Make it 30 states ban texting, even as you rightly say, but the laws are difficult to enforce. Let's do negative practice. 30 states ban texting, but the laws have been difficult to enforce, would make just as much sense as the way it is here. Be consistent. And so actually we have 4 values at stake in this example. First, precision. And let's see how it's more precise to say 30 states ban than 30 states have banned. Even though technically the present perfect have banned means action that began in the past and has continued continuously, not merely continually, but continuously through to the present. We know that in common conversational usage, and you are the conversational newspaper, that people commonly say the Mets have lost some games this year. It doesn't mean they're always losing. Yeah, I knew you'd say that. Yeah, let the record reflect that the comment was, yes, they are. Yes, they have been. See, yes, they are is stronger. So we know that people conversationally use the present perfect have often to mean something that, action that began in the past and ended a little later. So realistically here, 30 states have banned texting. Could mean, but several of those states repealed the bans. So we are much more precise to say 30 states ban texting, but the laws are difficult to enforce. We're also briefer, of course. We save a word, banned instead of have banned. We have the immediacy. The present tense does convey just an electricness. It is the web. It's the web writing of what's happening now, while also conveying the sense of futureness in the sense of if it's the law now, it probably continues to be the law a minute from now. And finally, in this particular case, the value of consistency. Present tense, instead of present perfect and then present tense. The Jets have been hoping and waiting. Make it the Jets hope and wait. Another standard to look for in the present tense is that the present tense conveys a sense of confidence. Now, your job as reporters is not to be rooting for one side or the other, but a sense of confidence in the sense of probability, confidence levels. If you want to convey the sense that this will probably continue to be the fact, use the present tense. Like, the Treasury backs paper money versus the Treasury has backed paper money. You can do the nuances of if you want to show, we here at USAT are not vouching for what will happen, then by all means say the Treasury has backed paper money. But if you want to convey a sense of, and this looks like long-term continuity, say the Treasury backs paper money. Had Einstein wanted to look tentative, he could have said, well, based on the factors that I considered, my analysis showed, at least with the factors that I looked at, E equaled mc squared. But when Einstein is ready to say this is true for all time and all space, he tells us that there's not going to be any change. It's like, and it also gives confidence to us readers to know what does Einstein mean. So, because we could be thinking, well, maybe sometimes E equals mc cubed. But Einstein tells us when it's good to go, I remember when I derived the fact that E equals mc squared. Let's improve the New York Times about New Orleans and Katrina. After the storms, the law required that members have expertise, members of a particular board appointed by the governor. The law required that members have expertise. Usually it's more important for your audience to know what is the law than what was the law, given a choice if you want to be quick. So given that choice, I would go with the law requires that members have expertise. Yes, question. Thank you. Good anticipating. And I should have. If I was as good a guest as you're a good host, I would have said yes, please. How would you do that? Neat. So appointed by the governor instead of who are appointed by the governor works perfectly. In fact, I'll back up so the value of your context is clear. Required that members, comma, appointed by the governor, comma, yeah. Oh, be expert in. Good. So you've saved some words. Be expert in fields instead of have expertise in. At the time, this was good writing. I mean, based on the law at the time about McCain-Feingold, the Times smartly says that under McCain-Feingold, groups are required, instead of have been, are required to follow strict rules on how they pay for them. The law requires, instead of required, but maybe it was repealed since, no, requires that donors be disclosed and caps, instead of has capped or capped contributions. Depart from the present tense only when it's necessary. If you need to educate your audience onto the whole span of time, then say, Since September 15th, 1982, with its first issue, USAT has given you news, money, sports, and life sections, and snapshots. And if you need to emphasize the continuity, then say ever since September 15th, 1982. The historical present is another item that uses the present tense. 8 straight sentences use the historical present in your cover story today. At 8:28 a.m., the cafeteria ladies at Centennial High School take up positions instead of the more prosaic took up positions, take up. And it goes on. It's a beautiful writing for 8 straight sentences, the first 8 sentences. And in fact, the second graph actually has a sentence that incorporates historical present by a speaker, a teacher. And a good teacher she is, because she's teaching historical present to the whole world through USAT. And that's the graph is, when science teacher Sue Aronofsky opens the door of her classroom, kids stream into the hallway. Quote, "You go around, you get your stuff, and you tell the lady thank you," she says. And this is beautiful, really smart writing. Historical present incorporating a quotation with the historical present. Well, choose strong verbs. Page 5, we're already talking much about the present tense and other elements, the active voice, of course, rather than passive, and avoiding weak nouns. So there you have simplification of the story will be effected by us tomorrow versus we simplify the story tomorrow. But I have come up with 11 places where you should use the passive. Here are 3. DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak has yet to be equaled. So where the actor is non-existent, if we wanted to make this active, it would be some blah thing like, well, no one has yet emulated DiMaggio's 56. Where the actor is irrelevant. Usually it's irrelevant to say, Pat Jones served the summons. Yeah, just go with the summons was served. And equal rights. This is a great way to write around the generic he for egalitarian writing. Tell any doctor your symptoms and you'll be advised versus tell any doctor your symptoms and he or she, but why not she or he, or they, which is fine with me, but some readers will object to, will advise you. And a good test of whether the alleged generic he really is generic is to change this sentence a little and ask anybody who tells you that, oh, it's fine to say, and he'll advise you, the doctor, he'll advise you that he is generic, give them this sentence and ask them to fill in the pronoun. Tell any nurse your symptoms and pronoun will advise you. And indeed, there you have, the logic behind that, and there is an argument on that side, is about using she for nurses, but he for doctors, is the statistical argument. I leave it to you. I defer to your expertise and ethical judgments about how to deal with egalitarian writing, but the argument would be that 9 out of 10 nurses are women. And that stat I got where and when? Today's USA Today. In an egalitarian story, by the way. Not that it's your job to present a political point of view, but it was great straight down the middle reportage and respecting your audience to be able to take the facts you present them and the interpretation and to apply their own ethical and political values. Page 6. Report to you, your reader. Lead sentence today. If you burp when taking an alcohol breath test, Does it invalidate the test? That engages the reader, the you in USA Today. On the other hand, you recognize that whenever we use the you, we are conjuring up certain images consciously or unconsciously in the reader. So you make the judgment of whether you want to have the reader conjure up their sense of being awkward and suspected of driving while impaired. Yeah. But, you serve millions of readers, and some will appreciate being put into that position and are able to abstract, and both consciously and unconsciously, and realize, well, I can engage on this and consider what would this situation be like for me. And you judge the demographics. It's certainly consistent with your journalistic integrity of reporting the facts. We're talking here about a style issue of where to use you. Oh, by the way, another thing you can use is I. If you want to distance your if you want to be personal, and yet distance your readers from an unpleasant thing, and if you're a good sport, you can use I. That tends to be more featurey, but you can actually say, if I'm driving down the road and then I'm taking the hit for anything unpleasant associated with the scenario. And now an example of you has made it into the New York Times, and this is a front-page hard news story where the lead is, what would you pay, sight unseen, for a house nobody wants? So this idea of bonding with your reader, with literally using the you, is becoming pervasive it's more nearly becoming pervasive in news. There's also a clarity value. Besides the engagingness, there's a clarity value of using you. Imagine you're writing up stuff about safety inspectors, and you describe what's the job of a safety inspector. The safety inspector and this is not in your notes. It's in my notes. See, you can read it from here, right? The safety inspector calls the plant manager whenever he hears his alarm. Well, there's a clarity issue about who's his alarm. Is it the inspector or the manager's alarm? And of course, there's the egalitarian issue. And a Homer Simpson-like safety inspector is likely to hear the safety inspector calls the plant manager whenever he hears his alarm, and Homer is likely to think, oh, I hope the safety inspector does. But you make it clear whom you're talking with when you say, if you're the safety inspector, you call the plant manager whenever you hear your alarm. Two songs by the Ronettes make this point about overcoming the generic he. The Ronettes sing, I want him, and I need him, walking in the rain. But Jay and the Americans changed the lyric to, I want her, I need her. But the Ronettes, and later Andy Kim, consistently sing, baby, I love you. So I and you are the egalitarian pronouns, and they also. Be consistent, page 7. That is, avoid elegant variation. Smart writing on your front page today. If you burp when taking an alcohol breath test, does it invalidate the test? The writer resisted the temptation to make things more interesting with using different words to convey the same meaning. Like, if you burp when taking an alcohol breath test, does it invalidate the examination? Consistent words. And throughout good consistent writing, there are 9 uses of the word test in this article, including the headline. Smart. Dare to be dull, but consistent, because people with legal minds and with people who are trying to just plain figure out what we're talking about will go through the wording and figure, well, is a test different from an exam? Be consistent. EPA said Thursday, BP has to choose an alternative dispersant by today and must begin using it by Sunday. Has to and must. Same meaning. Apparently, if there's intended to be some distinction here, make it clear to your reader. Otherwise, be consistent. I would go with BP must choose and must begin. Isn't that clunky? BP must choose and must begin. I know why it's clunky, because once we get rid of the elegant variation, we realize this is repetitive, it's redundant. So factor out the common element. BP must choose and begin. Owen. That's right. We're getting rid of it. Right, we don't need the second must. And by clearing elegant variation, it becomes clear to us that we not only do we not need the second must, but we must get rid of that second must for just elegant writing or to avoid clunky writing. Elegant variation can get us into trouble. It can be incendiary, insensitive, hurtful, unintendedly, I'm sure. The lead sentence of the lead story this one day of the Washington Post, black federal employees are more likely to be fired than white workers. The New York Times lead sentence again of a lead story. A conflict that has cost more than 2,100 American lives and an estimated 30,000 Iraqi deaths. The Times stretched so far for a synonym for lives, they came up with an antonym. So factor out the common element of what was intended, and you get a conflict that has killed more than 2,100 Americans and an estimated 30,000 Iraqis. The Times again says, to ban steroids and prohibit race day medications. Ban and prohibit, they mean the same thing. So make it to ban steroids and race day medications. We also serve our readers who care about avoiding split infinitives, because after all, and prohibit race day medication is a split infinitive. And so we save a word, we sidestep the split infinitive issue that some readers have. By the way, I'm fine with split infinitives. The reason for the so-called rule against split infinitives, it goes back to Latin. Latin says don't split an infinitive, but they have a good reason for it, because we couldn't split an infinitive in Latin even if we wanted to, because in Latin the infinitive is one word. Like here, to prohibit in Latin is prohibere. It comprises both words, to prohibit, into one word. So what couldn't be done has now become a rule to some people of what shouldn't be done. Now, in general, it's neat to put words that grammatically are similar together. So all things being equal, I like to fuse infinitives, but when there's a good reason to not do it, split that infinitive. But better here, we save words. Does anybody want to defend elegant variation? I'm already coloring it because elegant variation is a sarcastic term, meaning look who thinks they're so elegant throwing around synonyms. But does anybody want to make the case for elegant variation, for using different words that convey the same meaning? It's not that I'm expecting any professional writer to make the case, and okay, I'll make the case. It's interesting, it's colorful writing, but of course I will rebut myself by saying, but Hank, nah, it's, usually people when they are engage in an analysis of elegant variation, they usually concede, well, this is true, Hank, it's, using consistent words, yeah, it is more precise. It is clearer to people. Yeah, it is good that stop sign. I mean, we could read stop on a stop sign, regardless of whether it had 6 sides or triangles or circles. But yeah, there is a certain having that consistent shape, even though it's not as interesting. That consistency helps us on the road. But the last stand usually is about interestingness. But still, isn't it more interesting to use synonyms? It's ultimately an artistic argument, and yet artistry is another reason to be consistent. I mean, after all, I mean, art. Let's say visual art, is usually like a substrate of parallel lines onto which you applique some ornament. Now, if this is art, is this arter, and is this artist, I mean, the most art, is this even more art? I mean, the more squiggles I can put on the canvas, does that make it even more artistic? And same in music. There's, would anybody, figure that, well, usually music is a bunch of verses that are all tied to a consistent chorus, and everything with a limited number of meters, a limited array of meters. So, I mean, even like Papa Oo Mau Mau by the Rivingtons is often cited as a song that superficially at least is nonsense and flamboyant and undisciplined, but in fact it's a very disciplined song musically. So, I mean, it's a Papa Oo Mau Mau, Papa Oo Mau Mau. And so it may be the funniest thing I ever heard, Papa Oo Mau Mau. But it is a limited array of meters. It's conjunct in the sense of that the notes are together. I mean, would it be more musical if it was Papa Oo Mau 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 Mau? No, it's more musical to be disciplined with some variation on the theme. Well, yes, when it's in the same sentence. Well, here you have it. And we could go with an it, a pronoun here. If you burp when taking an alcohol breath test, does it invalidate it? And on inspection, it will be clear. The only game in town, the only noun that it could refer to, referring back, is test. So that could be. Usually when we have that feel, and I commend you, Kathy, for having that sensitivity to feel is it somehow clunky to have the same word, notably the same big word, in a sentence. It may clue us that we ought to write around this, that we're saying it too many times. We can, in mathematical terms, factor out the common term. You may come up with an example that we can work at, but thanks for the thought. Would Lincoln have been more eloquent had he said about resolving government of the people, by the populace, for the population? Now, when we factor out words, we've got to watch for ambiguity. For example, Fred Astaire, the dancer, was dead at the time that Washington Post wrote this. The late Jackie Gleason and Fred Astaire. Well, that gave Astaire fans false hope. It's ambiguous. Gave them anxiety, which is even worse than fear. Fear is focused. Anxiety is free-floating. What should the Post have done here on page 8? There you go. The entertainers, Gleason and Astaire. Now let's go to... actually, here you have an example where the Times agrees with you and me. The late actors, Vance and Frawley. So that makes it clear that the late applies to both because of the word actors. Clement Haynesworth, remember he was in the news, he was unsuccessfully nominated by Nixon for the Supreme Court. Years later, while he was still alive, the Washington Post columnist created false fear for friends of Haynesworth. The Court of Appeals judges, such as the late Craven and Haynesworth. So you could say that the late judge, well, actually, there Haynesworth is still alive. How should you write around this? What's the quick write around? Good. Put Haynesworth first. The rule is the modified thing, where the modifier applies just to one thing, put that at the end. So it becomes judges such as Haynesworth and the late Craven. Good catch. Lately it has been graced by the late, and you decide whether that's graceful language. There is something clunky about it. There is a rule about puns, that to have a pun you have to have two different roots. If the root of the word is common to both words, like late and lately, then it's really not a pun. It's just acting as if it's clever when it really isn't. But maybe it was clever. A question also, though, a taste issue and a feelings issue about whether you should be, if it was kidding around there, if we should be kidding around as writers when talking about death. Versus these are public figures, they can stand it. Thank you, Owen. Do factor out repeated words, page 9, but only if they're actually there. What's going on here? Let's reverse engineer the New York Times editorial about stem cells. One cell is plucked out, and the remaining 7 allowed to go on. Well, what word did the Times think they were factoring out? One cell is plucked out, and the remaining 7, what word would go there? What verb? What verb? And if we were expanding this, if this were the disco version of the song, the long version, and indeed it's going to be what we'll have to end up with. One cell is plucked out, and the remaining 7 blank allowed to go on. Are. Yeah. So that can't factor there. Would be nice if we could, but we can't. We can't pluck out an is that isn't there. Let's improve this lead head from the New York Times. Reward is offered and clues studied in African blasts. Well, as before, the implicit word there is reward is offered and clues are studied. We have clashing verbs, so either expand it to reward is offered and clues are studied, or what? What headline style can we use? Take out the is. Yeah, make it reward offered, comma, clues studied. Page 10. And we'll go to, thank you for inviting me for a full hour, right? So we'll go to 5:05. And your questions are still in order. Do vary your words to vary your meaning. Washington Post says, U.S. airline traffic dropped 10% in February with traffic on international routes plummeting 26%. So far, so good writing. They're distinguishing merely dropping 10% with plummeting 26%. The pattern was repeated. Now talk about pattern and repeating, which has a sense of continuity, consistency. Let's see the violation of that value coming up. On the other side of the Atlantic, where British Airways watched its business drop 30%. So that should have been even more of a plummet. So it shows that the Post lucked into the first two words, but ultimately we see that they were just synonym dropping. Sometimes the contrast between two meanings conveyed by two different words is downright evocative. The song, I'll Be Seeing You, closes with a deliberate and evocative using of different words, synonyms, but different words to convey different meanings. I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you. Let's improve consistency with this next paragraph. 3 issues of consistency here. First, the words. In ascending order of the percentage rises of these government programs, we have jumped, risen, soared, when the sequence should be risen, jumped, soared. Also, be consistent about what change are we measuring. On some of those government programs, we're measuring the percentage increase, but one other time, we're measuring the absolute dollar increase. And third, be consistent about, unless you have a good reason not to, be consistent about what elements you give for each of the items in this series. And some of the things you can use and are used here are percentage increase, the starting amount in dollars, and the current dollar amount. And also sometimes the dollar increase could be a relevant thing. But be consistent with what you include, unless there's a good reason not to. Now let's cantilever to another issue of consistency. Consistent subject of the sentence. The unemployment rate in Wisconsin is nearly 2 percentage points below the nation's and where Obama won. So we have a two-headed subject here. The unemployment rate is the 2 percentage points, but Obama didn't win the unemployment rate. He won Wisconsin. It's where Obama won. And the next sentence also has a consistency issue. Doyle is leaving after 8 years, and Obie has occupied since 1969. So be consistent. Doyle is leaving after 8 years, and Obie is leaving after 42. Now, do point out a consistency. Help your readers, but only if there really is a consistency. The study says poor command decisions helped contribute, now page 11. The study says poor command decisions helped contribute to a record 160 suicides and an additional 146 deaths resulted from risky behavior. The commonality is that these are both within the universe of deaths, namely suicides and risky behavior deaths, are all deaths. But the numbers are not similar. An additional 146 implies that there was another 146, that there are two groups, each with 146. So rather make it 160 suicides and 146 additional deaths. So that way you focus on what the similarity is. And by the way, by coincidence, USAT.com shows at least 2 additional articles over the years with a similar misuse of that exact phrase, an additional 146. And indeed, it's that there are 2 additional stories, not an additional 2 stories, because right here you have just 1 story. Let's also make this sentence uniguous instead of ambiguous about attribution. What's the attribution issue that needs improving here? Read through that sentence, please, and do you see there's something in there that is ambiguous about what the attribution is, of what's the source of this information? One fact in there is clearly sourced, but there's another fact in there that's ambiguous about what the source is. Now, your readers will help you out, that they'll have some sense from context about what the source probably is. But why not the best? Make the source clearer. Hint, it's the second element, an additional 146 deaths. What's the attribution for the first fact? The study. But it could be that USA Today here on the second element is simply helping the readers by supplying information that we got somewhere else. The study says 160 suicides happened, and an additional 146 resulted from risky behavior. So what single word will make this uniguous? We need to insert a word in front of an additional 146. That. The study says there were 160 suicides, and that an additional 146 deaths resulted. The relative pronoun that, ties it to the subject. And it will get you through so much complex writing, where a sentence has attribution, fact one, fact two, insert a that to convey the sense of the original attribution still applies to the second. We don't need that, by the way, in the first. You correctly omit that at the start. You don't need to say the study says that poor command decisions. The attribution there is locked in. Yes? We can have a vote on this. I mean, good, interesting thought, but I see these are distinguishable. But let's give it due process. The study says poor command decisions helped contribute to a record 160 suicides by active duty soldiers last year. And we here at USA Today are going to tell you also an additional 146 deaths. So actually, we have double attribution in a way, but again, tied only to the first item. But thank you for, I'm at least going to flag this, because this is my instant sense, but you deserve full, considered judgment on it. So since thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm going to study that. So let's put that into the maybe category right now. I'm leaning against, but your good point deserves a fuller thought. Owen. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Owen is pointing out that the facts are such that the study and the poor command decisions are meant to apply to both. But my question remains, though, does this sentence say that? And that's up for grabs. I'm going to look at this some more. Thank you for raising the point. Let's see. Well, we have 4 minutes. Do you have a fast question? Let's do something about guarding against bureaucracies. I mean, I love telling people and citing USA Today and other newspapers and TV to show people who are not news people how to write and speak like the news. And as opposed to the extreme horribleness would be the reverse, which would be write and speak like the snooze. 9 bureaucraties tips to dull your news writing. And a favorite is the do-nothing noun loitering after a thought. As in, the word activity, like, and I'm getting the nod. Like, you probably talk with bureaucrats who say, oh yes, well, we are engaged in research activity, and we have to knock it down to, they're engaged in research, or they research, verb the noun, instead of, I'm engaged in research activity on radioactivity activity. And it's a do-nothing noun loitering after the thought. And it dulls things. There's a natural punch at the end of a sentence. Radioactivity, dulled by the word activity at the end, another activity. Wall Street Journal had a front page graph headlined, "Strike Activity." It was simply a graph of strikes. So strike activity, and be clearer. Exploit that natural oomph at the end of thoughts. I mean, it's as if Beethoven led with da-da-da-dum, da. Well, now I leave with the future, encouraging you to lead with the future. And what's a good time to lead with the future? There's no time like the present, just as there's no tense like the present. So keep the you and the today in USA Today, and keep this conversation going. I mean, we're composing essentially an essay, a conversational essay about how to write even better across the paper and the web and video too, some of you do. And keep that essay going. Keep the essay in USA Today.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. And everybody, thank you.